Let's dive right into our program as we usher in that new industrial revolution filled with smart cities and self-driving cars. So what should businesses across all industries do right now to find success in the 5G future? We've got two experts to join us. David Grain is the founder and CEO of Grain Management, and Diane Rinaldo is Senior Vice President with Beacon Global Strategies. And my friend, colleague, and neighbor Jon Fortt will lead the conversation. Jon, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Tyler. I appreciate it, and I can think of no better way to kick off this exploration that we're going to do and to talk about policy and investment, and two top experts here in David and Diane. Diane, until very recently, you were acting administrator of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. So I want to start off asking about policy and positioning. Is the U.S. ready for 5G from a policy and incentive perspective? And how has the pandemic sort of shifted the goalposts and what success looks like?
Absolutely. And first off, it's great to be with you today. We are absolutely ready. The United States government has been working for the past several years to make more spectrum available. And as you know, spectrum is what's going to power 5G. It's the invisible airwaves that radio waves are going to course through to ensure that we have the networks and the availability and the power to ensure next generation technologies. But what's most important is to ensure this reliability. And how we do that is through the dance of 100 different companies coming together to ensure that we are deploying 5G in a manner that is fit for deployment as well as for innovation. I would say that this is the first time that we have that demand side, that innovation side truly pushing down on us, where we have emerging technologies that are looking to scale up. And what they need most is 5G. They need that bandwidth, that greater speed, the lower latency, and the reliability that 5G will bring to bear.
So, David, along those lines, you expect $500 billion a year in spend on 5G networks over the next decade. How does that expectation affect your investment strategy, and especially given that every area of the country certainly is not equally ready for this? There are gaps in the infrastructure.
Sure. And Jon, thanks for having me on. And Diane, it's very nice to meet you. And Jon, that number, $500 billion a year, is really a global number. But we will see quite a bit of investment within the United States as well. I mean, one of the keys is when you take a look at the electrification process of the United States at the early portion of the 20th century, there were great disparities. And we're seeing very much the same type of a pattern when it comes to broadband disparities at this beginning portion of the 21st century. So there'll be quite a bit of capital that's invested, not just in the spectrum that Diane is referencing, but also in cell towers and fiber networks that will allow us to fulfill our promise of 5G innovation and progress.
So, David, how is this time different in how this is going to roll out and how businesses should think about adoption? I mean, in a sense, there's a lot more built up hype. This iPhone that's out seems to be selling pretty well. There's going to be a strong consumer component to this, but the enterprise and industry is going to be pretty important too, right?
Oh, it is, for sure. I mean, look, this is not just about consumer applications, but also commercial, industrial, and even ultimately military applications. But one of the things that's been highlighted by COVID is the fact that we're working from home, our children are learning from home, we're entertaining ourselves at home. But there are, again, big differences, and companies need to be sensitive to their employee bases as well as their customers in terms of who can work comfortably at home. When you think about the data and the jobs market in the United States, 60% of people that make $100,000 or more can actually work from home. It may not be comfortable if they're not set up properly, but they can. People that make $40,000 and less, only 10% of those folks can work from home. So big disparities. Companies are going to need to be sensitive to their employee bases and their customers. But the opportunity to put capital to work to expand the ubiquity of broadband is definitely going to be a major theme for the next 10 years.
So Diane, to the extent that 5G is going to change the nature of work, how much of it is a case where if you're looking at the middle class and above, sort of economically, it's driven by work from home and mobility sort of trends based on what David was pointing out. And maybe if you're looking at the middle class and under, it's driven more by industrial, by manufacturing sort of trends and adoption.
Well, I think it's important to look at coverage in America. We have great coverage if you are in a city. It's the more rural areas that need to catch up. And with 5G coming online, with smart agriculture and other areas and other burgeoning sectors that are arising, it is giving a case study, a business case study to carriers to build out in those areas that they might not otherwise build out. And with this, we'll bring additional capacity. And additional capacity is going to allow for greater benefits to the communities in those areas, in-home broadband, for example. So people who otherwise wouldn't have the ability to have good coverage in order to work from home, this is going to change the dynamic. And I think that the COVID situation that we're all in right now is changing the thought process of business, of the boss. And so 5G is going to help benefit that by bringing additional coverage and support in those more rural areas.
Yeah, we're going to talk to Jamie Hinman, the CTO of Deere, a little bit later about exactly that trend that you're talking about. And David, when it comes to your specific investments and this idea of the need for connectivity in areas where it hasn't been before, are there opportunities that you see, ways that you're positioning, companies that you are funding or buying that highlight that?
Absolutely. When you consider tier 2, tier 3 markets around the country, which are those rural areas that Diane is speaking of, we own the largest private telecom provider in the state of Nebraska, Great Plains Communications, a terrific company that we acquired a couple of years ago. We're seeing a lot of expansion and increased demand within our customer base during the COVID crisis. We also own the largest private telecom provider in the state of Arkansas, Ritter Communications, which is also doing a terrific job of expanding their network, and will deploy a few $100 million in organic growth capital to expand and actually touch those communities that don't currently have high-speed broadband. Look, there are a lot of incentives, government incentives and government inspiration that has helped to move things along, but it needs to move along more swiftly for us to see economic expansion that's sustained, and for all Americans to be able to participate in that economic expansion, particularly those that are in rural areas or less affluent areas that may not have presented the economic model that's inspired the larger companies that focus on the major metros to expand.
Yeah, and Diane, there's a lot of talk around Washington now about stimulus. There had been talk even before that about infrastructure spending. To what extent has connectivity and 5G in particular been a factor in those conversations, and is it as much as it should be?
What we're hearing from the Biden administration is that they want to ensure that broadband is sufficiently funded. We are hearing great figures out of them on how to best move forward and how the government can help best support these efforts. It's absolutely important. What we're talking about is how could we bring this to scale? We are moving in a direction of connectivity. We have been, but if we want to ensure that the communities, the left behind communities, are being brought into the next generation, the fourth industrial revolution, along with the rest of the United States, the government plays a big part in this to ensure that they are properly connected and that they are able to seek the same benefits that the coasts of America are receiving.
So Diane, how should businesses plan for this? Because it's hard to know exactly when 5G networks with the right kind of capacity and throughput are going to be available in the space where I do business or need to do business or where my employees are working from home. I imagine there's a lag if businesses have to wait until they can go and test it out themselves and verify that it's there. Is there a more efficient way of doing that, or is it just sort of a wait and see where there's going to be that, okay, well, it looks like the network's ready, now let's begin to scale up?
So 5G, similar to 4G, is an iterative process. As new bands of spectrum come online, we're going to build out in those areas. But until then, business community, the emerging technologies that will be empowered by 5G, they already exist. We didn't see this with 4G, but with 5G, we have that demand side pushing down, demanding greater bandwidth, demanding greater speeds and capacity. So they are able to do testing, but in order to bring this to scale, to make it more ubiquitous, we do need a more robust 5G deployment in the United States. So we are able to get this initial deployments and testing accomplished, but we really need to see a more developed 5G in order to get things up to scale.
David, I'm curious on your global perspective on this 5G rollout and how it's gone. For the past couple of years, I've been hearing China is really going to lead with industrial when it comes to 5G, spreading that out and making sure that factories are using it and that they've got that flexibility that they need there. But they've also been pushing really hard and getting 5G-equipped smartphones at really low price points into the hands of consumers. So given that install base that they're both creating and incentivizing, how do you expect, say, China to develop along 5G capability and rollout versus what we see in the U.S. so far?
Well, look, this is a fairly complex topic, and I'll highlight the challenges that we've had in thinking through how to relate to Huawei and the rest of the world to relate to Huawei relative to security of these networks. But there's no question about it. China has invested quite a bit and is a front runner when it comes to both establishing the specifications and standards associated with 5G and are making great progress. Similar activities are going on in several other countries, South Korea, Japan, and we're even seeing India begin to make quite a bit of progress, as well as other communities. So, look, the biggest challenge is how does the United States relate to the front runners and how they are making progress, and how we can play a role in both establishing and being involved with monitoring the specifications and standards, so that we in the United States can actually make progress at a similar pace or really catch up to some of these other countries that have gone out in front of us.
David, with 3G in particular, I remember, to some extent with 4G, the U.S. at first looked to be behind Europe because, they had GSM and kind of these standardized things, but the free market in the U.S. and the big population and sort of the drive of the carriers and the innovation, I should point out, from Silicon Valley, including Apple, was really able to help the U.S. surge ahead. Do you see that likelihood or possibility this time with 5G?
I think so, but beware regulation, right? I mean, this is really one of the key things to be focused on. We live within a regulatory environment where it's become somewhat of a hand-me-down, ill-fitting suit that was created, patched, and darned since 1934. So we have to be careful to allow the market forces to do their job, while providing incentives and inspiration from a government standpoint until we see things settle out and understand what exactly we are regulating. So I do think that there is the opportunity for the U.S. to be a front runner within innovation and development around 5G, but I think it's important to recognize that we need both light touch regulation as well as government incentives and inspiration to deploy these technologies ubiquitously, very swiftly throughout all areas of the country.
And Diane, close us out here, if you will, keying off of that point that David just made, given that there are these big opportunities with 5G for the economy, for business, but also that uncertainty around exactly how light the touch of regulation will be. What would you say is one, maybe two kind of rules of the road as businesses look at 5G and what to prioritize?
Absolutely. Just to follow up on what David said, it's important that the government has a whole of government approach. How can government support business? It is the private sector that's building out 5G. Government needs to be able to support them as they do that. And for business, the innovation side, we are where we are because of the entrepreneurial spirit in the United States. We want to ensure that these developers, that these engineers and idea makers are able to continue to be able to prosper in the United States, and that's through education, research and development funding when available. So we need to be able to figure out how to best support these men and women as they continue to bring the United States into the fourth industrial revolution. I am very confident and bullish on the United States and excited to see what's ahead in the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's certainly good to hear that at the end of a year like the one that we have had. Thank you, Diane Rinaldo, Senior Vice President at Beacon Global Strategies, and David Grain, founder and CEO of Grain Management.